Imagine this. You're sitting alone in a quiet room. No distractions, no noise, just you. And a silence so pure it almost echoes. And then, slowly, you begin to notice something unsettling. Your thoughts. Not the ones you choose to think, but the ones that rise up without your permission. The way you brace yourself when someone raises their voice. The strange sense of guilt when someone else is upset. The reflex to apologize before you've done anything wrong. The need to keep everyone happy, even if it means burying yourself. Where did these instincts come from? Who put them there? You tell yourself, this is just who I am. But what if that's not true? What if what you call your personality is really a defense mechanism you built in a battlefield you no longer remember? Imagine a child, maybe 5 years old. She walks into a room and senses the atmosphere shift. She feels responsible. She becomes careful with her words. She learns to read faces before voices. She becomes attuned to tension like a deer to the rustle of leaves. And over time, these small adjustments calcify into traits. Empathetic, quiet, sensitive, anxious, overachiever, peacemaker, people pleaser, hyper-independent, strong. But what if all those words, those badges of identity, aren't signs of who she is, but rather of who she had to become to survive? And what if that applies to you? What if the very traits you proudly or shamefully call your personality are actually the fossilized remains of unresolved pain? You were not born anxious. You became anxious to stay safe. You were not born with trust issues. You learned distrust the moment someone betrayed your innocence. You were not born emotionally distant. You distanced yourself because the closeness you once knew ended in pain. And now you walk through life not knowing where you end and your trauma begins. Have you ever wondered why certain compliments make you feel uncomfortable? Why you recoil when someone tries to get too close? Why you sabotage good things before they can blossom? Why you always seem to replay the same emotional patterns no matter how many times you change your circumstances? We call it just the way I am, but maybe it's not who you are. Maybe it's what happened to you. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But what if it's not just fate you're misreading? What if it's yourself? What if you've never really met yourself, only the version of you that trauma sculpted in the dark? What if the deepest tragedy of trauma isn't the event itself, but the quiet theft of identity it performs over years, whispering, "This is who you are now," until you forget what you were before the wound? And here's the most painful paradox of all. The very traits that trauma forced you to adopt become the prison bars that keep you trapped. You build a wall to protect yourself, and then wonder why no one truly knows you. You stay quiet to avoid conflict, and then wonder why no one hears you. You strive for perfection to avoid shame, and then wonder why you're exhausted and empty. You see, trauma doesn't just break you. Sometimes it builds you, but with the wrong blueprint. And here's the terrifying part. The world will praise the version of you built by pain. They'll say, "You're so strong, such a hard worker, so composed." And every time they do, the mask sticks tighter to your face. You start to believe the lie, that this mask is you. But it isn't. So the great question is this. If your personality is a collection of strategies your nervous system developed in response to pain, who are you without the pain? If you strip away the overthinking, the fear of abandonment, the obsession with control, the need for validation, what's left? Not who do you want to be? Who were you before the world told you who you had to be? Can you even remember? Or have you been wearing the armor so long, you've forgotten what it's like to walk without it? You might feel the answer stirring somewhere deep beneath your ribs, a vague ache, a whisper, a grief that has no name. That feeling isn't your weakness, that's your soul, asking to be unburied. And so we begin. Let's trace the blueprint of this hidden architecture. Let's peel back the layers of psychology, philosophy, and survival that built your personality like armor forged in fire. Because until you see how trauma became you, you will never know who you really are. Let's return to the silence. But this time, listen carefully, not to your thoughts, but to what they're made of. A single reaction, tensing up when someone raises their voice, might seem harmless. But zoom out, and you begin to see something bigger. A psychological architecture made of hidden agreements. Agreements you never consciously made. You see, trauma doesn't just wound, it teaches. But unlike a wise teacher, trauma doesn't ask for consent. It implants beliefs in you while your guard is down, while your body is in survival mode. And that's the hidden problem. Trauma is not just something that happened to you, it's something that taught you how to be. Now consider this. What if much of your behavior, your beliefs, even your values were forged in the moments you were least conscious, when your nervous system was overwhelmed, when your innocence was interrupted, when you learned that the world is not always safe? Carl Jung believed that the psyche strives for wholeness, but when we are traumatized, we begin to fragment. To survive, parts of the self get exiled. The child who once danced without shame gets locked away the moment dancing becomes a source of ridicule. The one who cried openly vanishes after being told they're too sensitive. The trusting part retreats after betrayal. Each fragment stored in the basement of the unconscious, alive, waiting, silenced. And something else rises in their place. What we call the personality begins to form. But it's more like a defense strategy. It's not authenticity, it's architecture. A carefully constructed structure built to never feel that pain again, and we become so good at it. The overachiever is born from a child who feared being seen as inadequate. The perfectionist from one who was punished for making mistakes. The cold, distant adult might have once been a tender child, burned one too many times by intimacy. These aren't bad traits. They're intelligent adaptations, but they come at a cost. Arthur Schopenhauer once said that a man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants. Meaning, we might believe we are making choices, but often we are just acting out a script written by trauma, repeating patterns we don't understand in hopes of resolving wounds we don't remember. And if you think this is all just soft psychology, think again. Let's talk neuroscience. The human brain, especially in childhood, is shaped by its environment. The amygdala, responsible for fear responses, becomes hypersensitive when we're raised in chaos or unpredictability. The prefrontal cortex, the rational, self-aware part of you, can be underdeveloped in trauma survivors, especially those who lived in chronic stress. Trauma rewires the brain, literally. And the most dangerous thing about this wiring, it feels normal. You don't realize you flinch when someone is kind to you. You don't notice that your gut twists at the thought of rest. You don't question why silence feels terrifying, or why you can't receive love without suspicion, because it all feels like you. But let's go deeper. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, a condition in which we lie to ourselves to avoid the anxiety of freedom and responsibility. He believed that most of us live inauthentically, trapped by roles we never chose but now perform daily. Sound familiar? Bad faith is what happens when the trauma-ridden personality becomes so polished, so convincing, that we forget it was a performance at all. It's not just about childhood. It's about how society itself reinforces this illusion. We live in a world that rewards the trauma mask. The hyper-productive employee gets the promotion. The self-sacrificing parent is praised. The emotionally numb partner is seen as chill or low drama. Even spiritual bypassing gets applauded. The positive vibes-only crowd often masks deep avoidance beneath polished smiles. But what's the cost? Friedrich Nietzsche once warned, every deep thinker is more afraid of being understood than of being misunderstood. Why? Because to be truly understood means being seen without your armor. And that is terrifying, especially when the armor is all you've ever known. We become fluent in hiding. We laugh at jokes we don't find funny. We tolerate relationships that make us smaller. We speak in ways that keep us liked, not honest. And slowly, we forget what authenticity even feels like. This is why Gabor Mate, a physician who has spent his life studying addiction and trauma, says, the essence of trauma is disconnection from the self. That line carries an unbearable weight. Not just pain, disconnection, because once the self is buried under fear, shame, survival mechanisms, you begin to chase substitutes. Validation, control, productivity, addiction, perfection. You try to do enough to feel like you are enough, but it never lands, because the version of you that needs to feel worthy is still in exile. Trauma doesn't just create fear, it distorts meaning. A child learns that love is conditional and grows into an adult who only feels lovable when they're performing. A teen learns that speaking up leads to punishment and becomes an adult who whispers through life, terrified of their own voice. These meanings calcify over time into identity, and we become loyal to them. Yes, loyal to our own pain. We defend it, we rationalize it, we call it realism, or just being smart, or knowing better. But beneath the cynicism, beneath the "I'm just being careful," is often a broken belief. I am not safe being who I truly am. And that is the belief trauma installs with surgical precision. Now the stage is set. The mask is fused to the skin, and the audience, the world, applauds, unaware that the actor has forgotten it's a role. You've learned how to function, but have you learned how to feel? You've learned how to hide, but have you ever dared to be seen? You've learned how to survive, but do you remember how to live? That's the real question. And here lies the deeper tragedy. The longer you wear the trauma-made personality, the more the real you atrophies beneath it. But not all is lost. Because somewhere beneath the scripts and reflexes, the quiet and the masks, something still pulses. A longing. Not for perfection, not for safety, but for truth. And now that you've seen the machinery, the unconscious programming, the philosophical distortions, the societal rewards, you're ready to witness the cost of staying asleep. Because the consequences are not just psychological, they're existential, and they touch everything. So now, the mask is on. It fits snugly, seamlessly. You've worn it for so long it no longer feels like a costume, it feels like skin. You walk through life, answering to a name that was given, responding to emotions that weren't chosen, driven by desires that were inherited from pain. And the tragedy, you don't even know you're asleep. You function, you achieve, you love in ways, you even feel happiness sometimes. But beneath it all, there's a constant undertow of something, a vague emptiness, a tension that never loosens, a hunger that nothing external seems to feed. This is the unseen consequence of trauma that becomes personality. You mistake adaptation for identity, and because you can no longer tell the difference, you build your entire life on a foundation that was laid in fear. Imagine a house, elegant, beautifully decorated, every room curated. The walls are clean, the furniture comfortable, the lighting soft, but the foundation is cracked. It always was, and no one can see it, except you. You feel it in the creak of the floors, the chill in the walls, the constant anxiety that something will collapse if you're not always watching, always fixing, always holding it all together. This is life built on unresolved trauma. And the worst part? Society will reward you for it. Because society doesn't care if your foundation is fractured, as long as the facade looks good. If you're productive, no one asks if you're fulfilled. If you're agreeable, no one questions whether you're suppressing rage. If you're high-achieving, no one checks whether you're compensating for deep unworthiness. In fact, they'll give you awards, applause, likes, promotions, praise. And the deeper the dysfunction, the more convincing the performance becomes. This is what makes it so hard to spot the consequences. The trauma personality is efficient. It keeps you from getting hurt, but it also keeps you from getting close. It helps you fit in, but it also keeps you from being seen. It keeps you safe, but it also keeps you small. Let's talk about love. When your personality is built from trauma, love doesn't feel safe. It feels threatening. Why? Because real love requires openness, vulnerability, surrender. But your trauma taught you that vulnerability equals danger. So you armor up. You become the caretaker, the comedian, the unshakable rock, or maybe the ghost, the one who disappears when things get real. And then you wonder why your relationships feel low, like performances, why no one really gets you, why love feels like something you're constantly earning, never receiving. It's not just romantic love either. Friendships become strained because you always say yes when you mean no. Work becomes draining because you overfunction to avoid feeling useless. You become a stranger in your own body, living as a projection of who you had to be, not who you are. Now let's bring in the science. Trauma, especially chronic, low-grade trauma like emotional neglect, constant criticism, or lack of safety in childhood, alters your nervous system. Your baseline becomes hypervigilance. Even when nothing is wrong, your body prepares for impact. This isn't just psychological, it's neurological. Your amygdala, your brain's threat detector, becomes hypersensitive. Your hippocampus, responsible for memory and emotional regulation, shrinks. Your prefrontal cortex, the rational decision-making part of the brain, gets less blood flow when you're triggered. This means that even small stressors can activate a massive internal response. You might look calm on the outside, but inside, your system is screaming. And here's the kicker. You get used to it, so used to it in fact that calm feels suspicious, peace feels boring, love feels dangerous, freedom feels unearned. This is how trauma distorts perception itself. Now take that internal distortion and place it in a collective context, a society of fractured selves. We get a world where productivity is praised over presence, numbness is mistaken for emotional maturity, hyper-independence is called strength, constant busyness is seen as virtue, vulnerability is pathologized, slowing down is laziness, asking for help is weakness. We've built a culture on top of unresolved trauma, and then we call it normal. And what does that do to us? We become disembodied, cut off from our intuition, unaware of what we actually want because we're too busy managing everyone else's expectations. We eat, sleep, work, scroll, not because we're living, but because we're distracting ourselves from the ache of not knowing who we are without the pain. Let's talk about addiction, not just to substances, but to validation, to work, to being needed, to drama, to control, to suffering. Gabor Mate says, the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And once you understand trauma's role in shaping personality, that quote hits differently. You're not addicted to coffee, you're addicted to feeling useful. You're not addicted to social media, you're addicted to feeling seen. You're not addicted to work, you're addicted to outrunning the belief that you are not enough. And every time the dopamine hits, it dulls the ache, but it doesn't heal the wound. That's the consequence, a life that works, but doesn't feel alive. A self that functions, but doesn't feel real. A mask that smiles, while the soul underneath withers. You might not even notice until one day something cracks. A breakup that feels like the end of the world, a panic attack in a grocery store, a burnout that makes you question everything. A moment of silence that suddenly becomes unbearable. Or worse, nothing cracks, and you just go on, tired, numb, disconnected, calling it adulthood, calling it strength, calling it just the way life is. But it isn't. And if you're still reading this, it means something in you knows that. You see, the unseen consequences of trauma-formed personality are not just personal, they ripple outward, into your relationships, your choices, your future, into the way you treat your own children, into the way you let others treat you, into the way you treat yourself when no one's watching. And maybe now, just maybe, you are starting to feel the urgency, not to fix, not to rush, but to wake up. Because this life, your life, was never meant to be a shrine to survival. It was meant to be a return to you. But first, you must rebel, not against the world, against the lie you've been living. And that's what comes next. You don't wake up one day and suddenly become free. There's no lightning bolt, no grand revelation that shatters the illusion. Freedom from trauma isn't a moment, it's a rebellion. And rebellions are slow, quiet, terrifying revolutions, waged from within. To break free from a personality built by trauma, you must do something that feels at first like death. You must disobey your own instincts, not because they're wrong, but because they were built in a time when survival mattered more than truth. Now survival is no longer the enemy, but the armor is still strapped tight. You feel it when someone asks, "What do you really want?" And you freeze, not because you don't want anything, but because you've spent your whole life wanting what kept others happy. You feel it when someone says, "You can rest now," and your stomach twists, because rest feels like weakness. You feel it when you try to speak your truth, and the words get caught behind a throat trained for silence. This is where rebellion begins, not in shouting, not in some glorious act of defiance, but in the whispers you once silenced, in the tears you once swallowed, in the boundaries you never dared to set, in the small moments where you say, "No more." Let's start here. What if you are not broken, but buried? That question alone can change everything. Because when you believe you're broken, you seek fixing. But when you realize you're buried, you begin the sacred work of excavation. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, the unfolding of the true self through integration of the unconscious, us. He believed that what you need most is hidden in what you fear facing. That means your rebellion begins in the dark, in the basement of your psyche, where all the rejected parts of you live. The angry child, the grieving teenager, the terrified young adult, the one who cried too loud, the one who wanted too much, the one who failed, the one who loved recklessly, the one who was punished for simply being human. These parts weren't erased, they were exiled. And now, they wait, not for you to rescue them, but to recognize them, to turn toward them without shame, to say, "You belonged here all along." This is not about therapy jargon. This is not about inner child trends or feel-good slogans. This is spiritual warfare against everything that taught you to hate your own reflection. And you won't win by force. You win by remembering. Remembering that your need for love was never a weakness. That your craving for connection was not naivety. That your sensitivity was not a flaw. It was clarity in a world that had gone numb. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." So the rebellion is this. You take what was done and you transmute it. Not by pretending it didn't happen, not by painting over pain with positivity, but by using it to create something no one expected. A self that is no longer a reaction, a self that chooses, a self that pauses, that says, "I don't have to perform anymore." That says, "This rage has wisdom." That says, "This sadness is a map." That says, "I don't have to prove my worth, I only have to remember it." Let's talk strategy. Step 1. Practice holy disobedience. Say no when your trauma says yes. Say yes when your fear says no. Sit still when your nervous system tells you to run. Speak when your shame says stay silent. Even if your voice trembles, especially then, this will not feel good at first, because your brain will scream, "This is unsafe." But remember, your brain doesn't know the difference between discomfort and danger. It only knows what's familiar. So when you begin to rebel, your body will shake, your palms will sweat, your thoughts will try to seduce you back into the comfort of your old cage. Ignore them. You're not in danger, you're in transformation. Step 2. Allow contradiction. You can be both terrified and ready. Both broken and divine, both grieving and grateful, both angry and soft. This is not hypocrisy, this is wholeness. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote that the person who writes to instruct will do best to leave every reader to think for himself. So here's a thought to chew on. What if you were never meant to be consistent? What if all your parts, wild, quiet, angry, joyful, numbed, loving, were not enemies to be tamed, but languages of a soul trying to speak through a damaged body? What if your contradictions are proof that you're still alive? Step 3. Stop outsourcing your reflection. Trauma trains you to define yourself through others, to ask, "Am I okay now? Am I loved yet? Am I enough now?" But rebellion means becoming your own mirror. You don't ask the room, "Is it safe to be me?" You say to the room, "This is me, take it or leave it." This isn't arrogance. It's homecoming, because the moment you stop shape-shifting is the moment you start being seen. And yes, some people will walk away, but the ones who stay, they'll be meeting you for the first time. Step 4. Make peace with the death of the old self. This one hurts, because healing is not just about finding yourself, it's about losing the self you had to become, the one who never asked for help, the one who smiled through agony, the one who became what others needed, even if it meant disappearing. Mourning that version of you is not betrayal, it's gratitude. That self kept you alive. But you're not just here to survive anymore, you're here to live, to feel sun on bare skin wit, without flinching, to cry in front of someone without shame, to laugh without scanning the room, to say, "I love you," and mean it, without waiting for permission. This is the rebellion. Not against your family, not against society, but against every story that told you freedom was dangerous. It's in the silence after a boundary is set. It's in the trembling yes to intimacy. It's in the first time you let yourself rest without guilt. And it's in the mirror when you look into your own eyes and say, I am no longer afraid to be me. You are not your triggers. You are not your patterns. You are not your trauma. You are the awareness beneath all of it. And the more you reclaim what was buried, the more you remember who you were before the world told you to be someone else. Now you're not just a person, you're a revolution walking. And the old self, it doesn't vanish. It bows and says, "Thank you for finally coming home." It ends not with a scream, but with a silence. A silence so deep it's almost unsettling. A silence where, for the first time, nothing in you is trying to impress, apologize, perform, or protect. And in that quiet, something ancient stirs. Not a new idea, not a strategy, but a remembering. You don't need to fix yourself. You were never broken. You were separated from your center, your source, yourself. That's the ultimate truth trauma hides. You are not a wounded identity. You are a witnessing consciousness, eternal, spacious, indestructible. And everything else, the pain, the story, the mask, was a layer built on top. You've spent years peeling back those layers, trying to heal, trying to understand, trying to improve. But healing isn't climbing upward, it's descending into the place where you stop trusting your own essence. Think of it this way. Trauma told you, you are not safe, so you looked outward, to parents, to peers, to partners, to mirrors that reflected distorted versions of you, and you shaped yourself around their gaze until you disappeared. But now, finally, you're asking the real question. One, who am I when I stop being who the world told me to be? And the answer doesn't come in words. It comes in stillness, in the breath that doesn't rush, in the body that no longer flinches, in the gaze that meets the mirror, not for approval, but recognition. You were never the personality, you were never the mask. You were the one watching, waiting, through every breakdown, through every panic attack, through every relapse, through every night you couldn't sleep because the ache in your chest felt too big to name. You watched, and now you're ready to return. Carl Jung called this the self, the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, shadow and light. It's not your ego, it's not your trauma story, it's the wholeness that was always there, beneath the adaptations. And here's the final paradox. The moment you stop trying to become someone, you remember you already are. You don't become your true self by effort, you become it by unbecoming everything that was layered on top. And when you do, something changes. You stop chasing love, because you are love. You stop fearing rejection, because nothing essential can be taken from you. You stop comparing, because you finally trust your own pace, your own path, your own presence. And the world? It doesn't suddenly become perfect, but it becomes clear. You begin to see through the illusions. You see that most people are wearing masks too, tightly stitched to their skin by pain, by fear, by stories they never wrote. And instead of judging, you begin to feel something unexpected, compassion, because now you know the truth. People don't hurt each other because they're evil. They hurt each other because they're hurting, because they've forgotten who they are, because they're still lost in the maze of their own survival identities. And suddenly, healing becomes more than personal. It becomes transcendent. Why? You stop needing revenge. You stop needing to prove yourself. You stop needing to win. Because you realize you never lost anything that was truly yours, and no one can take what you've reclaimed from within. Now the mind is no longer master. The past is no longer dictator. The trauma is no longer author. You are. And as the author, you choose a new language. Not the language of fear, but of truth. Not the language of control, but of trust. Not the language of worthiness, but of being. You were always worthy. Not because of your resilience, not because of your accomplishments, not because of how well you hid your pain, but because you exist. This is the wisdom the mystics knew, the insight beneath every philosophical pursuit, the flame that burned in Viktor Frankl's eyes when he wrote that even in the horror of Auschwitz, man can still choose his response. That is your freedom, not freedom from pain, but freedom within it. The ability to say, I know who I am now, and nothing can separate me from it again. Let others stay asleep. Let others cling to their masks. You are not here to convince them. You are here to become a mirror, and through your presence, calm, embodied, awake, you offer something rarer than advice, permission to be real, to be whole, to stop running, to come home, not just to your past, not just to your potential, but to the eternal now. where your breath is enough, where your silence is sacred, where your existence is not a problem to solve, but a mystery to embody. So take one final breath, not to calm down, but to mark the moment you stopped searching for yourself and started being. Because now you know, trauma didn't create your personality, it only obscured your soul. And your soul, the vast, tender, terrifyingly beautiful truth of who you are, has always been waiting. Not to be saved, but to be seen. And now, finally, it is.